How do I keep our governments working? How do we get our relationships to work out? How do we get our acts together as human beings? This is not an easy thing. How do we keep ourselves together in the midst of all the chaos that is surrounding us every single moment of our lives? It's a headache, that's for sure. And we need pain relief, and it isn't an NSAID. Hi, I'm Michael Shevack. Welcome to God's Search. It's podcast 22. We're going to continue our discussion on covenant. That covenant is that strange religious word that everyone's fighting over on who has the covenant, and no one knows what the covenant is. So let's continue what we were talking about. Covenant is about alignment. Alignment. That's the Latin word or the Latin root of the word for covenant that's used in the English text, which came from the Vulgate into the St. James. But, it's Brit in Hebrew, it's covenant. And as I said last time, covenant is a very ancient concept. It began as a kind of mutual non-aggression pact between ancient kings. They wouldn't destroy each other and they'd form an alliance, and then their powers would become aligned to something greater. Now, if you take one king and then you add another king and then you add another king and another king, and you expand the alignment between different powers, you get a larger and larger and larger power. And eventually you get the concept of a king of kings or the common religious God. So covenant is a very ancient experience that came out of an early Hebrew environment, early Semitic environment, and it has been amplified into a theological notion that has been world transformative, absolutely world transformative. And it still remains world transformative. There's no doubt about it. Now, we spoke last time about the whole issue of alignment. And alignment is the core challenge if you want to be on a God search. Alignment is the core challenge. Don't look further. It's alignment. All right, alignment. How do you align who you are so that you are moving in a whole direction? You are mirroring the unity, the truth, and the cause and effect, the causal nature of a creative being, so that you are in the image of God, in the image and likeness of God. How do you do that? How do you make that alignment? It's not easy. We spoke last time that the human being in many, many ways is a kind of individualization of the world in which we live. Okay. And we embody all of these different aspects. So we have a material aspect, which all of us are very aware of when we die. It's materia and it goes back into the planet. It's, all the elements. It's an elemental body. And there's a substructure to that, which is atomic and now quantum, and that's part of it also. And above that, we have a kind of natural level to ourselves, which is like, ants and earthworms and all sorts of other creatures. We'll have a supra natural aspect to our mind, kind of like chimps and some birds that can make, twigs and use them as primitive tools. Supra meaning slightly above nature, earthly nature, with a small n is how I write it. And then you have a technology which is wider than supranatural, which is super, meaning beyond nature, where we can create things that nature would never even imagine creating. Nature does create twigs that birds can either make themselves because they're doable or, find. But to create something that nature wouldn't do without your imagination is the hallmark of being a supernatural being, which is the astonishing gift of being human. And then beyond that, the supernatural, you have this a universe that is way beyond anything that we can call earthly natural, that includes our solar system, solar systems beyond, galaxies. It could be uncountable number of universes. you know, and each universe that is created could have a kind of direction that was sent in motion on that. So we might call that a meta natural, meaning it's a kind of transitional or bridge stage between wherever the source of everything is and a particular universe that may come to exist. And beyond that, we might identify something which mystics would call divinity. Okay. It's a perfectly good word. It's something beyond something which from which everything else comes. And I might call that the transnatural. So if we start from the top down, we are trying to form an alliance in covenant between the transnatural, the possible metanatural, a universe, right, or a natural with a capital N. Okay, we have the supernatural, we have the supranatural, we have the earthly natural, and we have the material, and what's deep within the material, which is an energetic and a quantum field that is beyond us to fully fathom, which brings us back to possibly the transnatural. And that's a discussion on whether the universe or a universe is actually God or is a creation of God. It's a very serious discussion. These are the components that are built into us because we come from a reality that we can witness as having these different components. As you open up spiritually and as you begin to experience God, have the experience that is called God, you can witness these various levels yourself, and you will actually be able to stand apart from it and actually see them functioning and have an awareness that isn't stuck in any one particular thing. So you'll know it as readily as you might know that there's a pen on the desk. There is a pen on my desk right now, and I know that to the extent that I can. So that's one very sublime aspect of the tremendous alignment that is part of covenant. If you are Christian, you will recognize that as Christ. If you are Jewish, you may recognize that as Kabbalah, and the meta natural could be considered to be Keter. Okay, if you are Hindi, you will recognize that there are scales of divinity here and names of gods that can be appropriated that fit into this kind of rational construction that I've done. This is a kind of general kind of map that you can plug different religious views and different philosophical views into it and basically keep a coherent structure with them so we can compare them. Never to blur religions. Never on GODSEARCH do you take all of the different religions and put them in the big cosmic Cuisinart and you mash them up and serve them out with a spoon and call that universal. We don't do that here. There is a sacredness to each view. There is a uniqueness to each person and a sacredness to each religious personhood that needs to be respected and has unique information recorded a unique way in a unique language and expression which is needed for humanity. All of it is necessary. It's all knowledge. So be very careful of making the mistake of academics where they'll give you a rational structure like I've just done, and then they just consider everything to be the rational structure, and they dissolve all of these wonderful individual understandings and indigenous understandings into one cosmic soup and call it Western civilization or whatever they want to call it. Be very careful of that kind of, I don't know how to explain it. The technical word is supersessionism. Supersessionism, where your idea is considered higher and you replace all the lower ideas. Anyway, we're going to get to the complexity of the deep, deep experience of being imbued with levels of consciousness that are associated with divinity. But here on GODSEARCH, we are dealing with a very specific spiritual path. Okay, that's what I'm teaching. If you're a monk, I will introduce you to other people who are better teachers than me. I do not do monk very well. Here, we're interested in what I would call universal, meaning basically human, accessible to all humans. That doesn't mean all humans have to do it. It's not, you're not required, but universal, meaning something accessible to all human beings. Historical, which we'll talk about later. Religion, universal historical religion, or a universal historical approach to religere, the root of the word religion, which means to bind back to its original source. Re comes back, ligere, like a ligament binds. So let's start on the ground up. We've started from the top down, so you got a nice map. But now let's start with the bottom up. It is hard to be human. Have you noticed it? It is messy, as my wife would say. It's messy to be human. And that's because there are a lot of different sides to us. Just take a look at what we do every single day. We have so many different sides of us, so many different sides of us that they're hard to cohere. We may be a student, we may be a father, we may be a mother, we may be a worker in a certain place, we may be a teacher, we may be a student, we may be an artist, we may have all of these different aspects. We may be a he, we may be a she, we may be something in between that's a they. We may have all of these different aspects, and there's a multiplicity of these kind of, ego states. I like that phrase, ego states. Eric Berne, who was I think, a great psychiatrist, invented that phrase. I think he invented it. If he didn't invent it, he certainly used it. We have all of these different kind of phenomena to our ego and who we are. And they oftentimes will fight with each other and conflict with each other, as we discussed in earlier podcasts, because there are mind cracks. And the first aspect of learning to create a covenantal experience, meaning an experience of alignment or inner unity on the inside of us, is to be aware of the fact that there are so many different pieces to us and so many conflicts that we have to bring together. And many of the rules and regulations and mythologies and traditions that we're raised with are oftentimes based in ancient histories of wars and mental conflicts and new ideas that were conflicting with old ideas or were correcting old ideas. So we have a tremendous inheritance built on the inside of us from our human knowledge, an incredible heritage of conflict on the inside of us, and it is not easy. That's why when you enter onto a God search, which you are on, as I say, if you're alive, you're already on a God search. When you become aware that you're on a God search, you become more and more aware of the wars that are on the inside of you and the fact that they have to come into alignment. They're all like ancient kings that have to agree to a mutual non-aggression pact. Okay. And they begin to come in alignment when you take the first actual step towards spirituality, because that's what covenant is. Covenant is a fancy term for living, breathing, historical, we'll talk about that, spirituality. Religion is not apart from spirituality. Spirituality is not apart from religion, but religion is founded first and foremost on a living, breathing, innate spiritual sense that every single human being has. Every single human being has it. It's nothing that you have to purchase. You are born with it. You are born with it. So the first step in actual spiritual is culturing spirituality as the foundation to the covenantal experience, which leads to God. And we talked about that in podcast number 2. Grow. Grow. If you are going to enter into a covenantal adventure so that you can have the experience called God, you must be committed to growing, to not being satisfied with who you are, accepting and loving who you are, which is really good psychologically. Otherwise, you'll hate yourself and create a mess. Accepting and loving yourself for who you are, but choosing to grow in unity, to grow in truth, and grow in greater effectiveness of how you sow and reap, which is why we spoke about value and relationship priorities for the past 12 podcasts. Hope you were listening. If not, review the material. It will help you. After you are committed to growing, which is number one, spirituality begins with a dedication to flowing. First, there's growing, then there's flowing. Flowing is extremely important. If you read some of the psychological stuff by people like Csikszentmihalyi, you'll see the incredible importance of flowing for psychological ease and psychological maturity is very, very important. It is the core foundation of spirituality because we live in a creative universe. Well, we are part of the creative universe, being aware that we are part of the creative universe. And I use the word universe very carefully because we're not ready to talk about scale yet. Well, let's put it this way. We live in our experience of reality. And within our experience of reality, we notice that it is moving, it is progressing. We seem to go from one moment in so-called time to the next moment in time. From the very practical standpoint of a basic human cognitive framework, where there's up and down, your head is up, your feet are on the ground, there's right and there's left. You can take a step forward, then another step forward, and another step forward. It's hard to go backwards, hard to see to the right, it's hard to see the left, but you can go forward. There is a sense of flow. The most important thing after you are devoted to growing is to trust the flow. Spirituality and the adventure of covenant opens its door when you are willing to trust the natural, easy experience of life's flow. That's when the doorway to the adventure of covenant, which reveals the experience that we call God, begins to open its door. Why? Well, because since everything can be observed to flow, and you can be observed to flow within the flow, and that flow and you can coordinate, harmonize, and align, meaning form a covenantal union and unidirectionality, flow becomes the most readily accessible way to begin an adventure of covenant. Trusting the flow could be said to be trusting the hand of God. It's another thing you could say that you're trusting time. Trusting time. I'm not saying what time is. It's very, 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 very difficult to discuss. Kant, the great Immanuel Kant, had a stunning understanding of time as a cognitive framework. I'm not going to go into the nature of time and all this stuff. We are talking right now on the most basic levels of human life, where time appears to exist, moving forward appears to exist. And I'm saying it appears to exist. Let's not debate it. Now, trust it. Trust the flow of time and trust that it is purposeful, that it is achieving something, and that when you are going about your everyday life, there is a structure behind you that is propelling you and motivating you, and that inspires your own personal motivations that you add to that flow. You add your flow to its flow, and you have the rudiments of human spirituality. The rudiments of human spirituality. By the way, please go to yourgodsearch.com and go into the publication section. There's a book called Covenant. It's really simple. It will help break this stuff down, because the learning in trying to understand it can be a little burdensome until you begin to get your feet wet and step into the pool of water and begin to notice the power of what flow means. So the first thing you do with spirituality is you have to trust the incredible power and the incredible, as you will discover, intelligence and knowledge that is built into the every single day and every single moment flow of life. It's there and it is witnessed. Now, that doesn't mean you may right now not be suffering. It doesn't mean right now everything is going great and it's hunky-dory. All right, you can easily feel that life is placing you in the crapper. Okay, nonetheless, no matter what is happening, whether it is good or whether it is pleasant or whether it is unpleasant and bad and it feels terrible, nonetheless, spirituality begins, its adventure begins, and the doorway to the covenantal experience and that incredible unification on all levels, from the material to the transnatural, takes place when you begin with the simple step of trusting flow. Another way people describe it is they're trusting God. They're trusting the Lord. They're trusting life with a capital L. They're trusting reality. They're trusting experience. They're trusting their viewpoint of common sense. They're trusting what's practical. Okay, and that can get clogged up with fears around money and all sorts of things. But they are trusting the living human experience of life. And that is the beginning doorway. It's really beautiful in the Bible, the Old Testament, that Christians call it, which is not exactly the same, but it's a slightly rearranged version of the Hebrew text. God describes himself as Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. Now, it's oftentimes translated, I am that which I am, which places everyone in some kind of eternal being and unidimensional soup where everything is God and nothing isn't God. And then, it's all one upon oneness, upon oneness, upon oneness. It's a bad translation. The Hebrew is really future sense, and Martin Buber, who was the great rational mystic, astonishing rational mystic, brilliant philosopher, describes that phrase as being, I will be there in whatever form I am, in whatever form I choose. I meaning God. In other words, the experience of flow is, and trusting flow, what religions would say having faith in flow, is the experience of saying that whatever the forms and experiences and dance of complexities and relationships, pleasant or not pleasant, that occur to you, that is the source of all being, that is God on the level that we're experiencing, expressing itself in the multiplicity of phenomena that we are experiencing at any moment. So trusting flow is the first step towards experiencing the magnificent beauty And the perfect life that is placed in front of us. Perfect from the Latin meaning being shaped, being created, being formed. Doesn't mean perfect, meaning some ideal that you smash your head against and can't really ever fulfill, so you live a life hating yourself. No, 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 that's not perfect. So trusting flow is the doorway. Now, be very careful. When you're trusting flow on your God search, people can trust it so much that what happens is they can get passive. You sometimes see this in kind of like spiritual, new agey kind of, pardon the expression, it's old, but it's a nice word. It's my generation, kind of hippiness, where you trust in the flow and you trust in the flow and we're in the flow and you trust in the flow and the flow is what it is. And that's, and it gets a little spacey, it gets a little spacey. Be very, very careful that if you're trusting the flow, that it doesn't mean that you don't have a participation involved. That's why here on God Search, we put grow before flow, which really doesn't make much sense. Okay, really flow goes before grow, and there is no grow without flow. But we put grow first because if you simply trust life 100%, but are not willing to focus in on your own growth and your own covenantal adventure of aligning the different pieces of your psychology and the different broken aspects of yourself and your relationships and our society and our government and governments upon governments. If you don't do that, we're missing out on the depth and the incredible, amazing adventure of the covenantal experience, which is really worldwide. And we are all experiencing that because there is a campaign that's been in place now for close to 4,000 years. This today is the doorway to that. That campaign is a covenant which embraces all humankind. So be very careful if you're going to trust flow so much that you cease to trust yourself and your own ego and your own supernatural ego that can engineer life for the things that you would like and that are very important to you and very important to all people. I would not be here if someone didn't trust their mind to create this computer. Be very careful of taking flow as the only aspect of spirituality. It will be terribly incomplete, and you will miss out on the full experience called God. God is not a passive instrumentality, though there are many, many religious disciplines that specialize in diminishing the activity in life, diminishing the sexuality, diminishing the material hungers for, niceties, for the purpose of elevating other aspects, the supernatural and the metanatural and the transnatural. Okay, these are art forms. These are different religious art forms. They are all marvelous. They all teach us things. They are all worthy and they are important. But here on God Search, we're going to teach a basic God experience, which is universal and historical, meaning it includes community and the entire world, but it doesn't exclude other viewpoints. But be careful here to avoid turning flow into an instrument which paralyzes you from your own activity, your own innovation, your own creativity, your own imagination, your own playfulness, your own ability to, I don't know, be a child. To be a child and open your imagination to the possibilities that are inside your heart and actually turn them into little material experiences, which is the wonderful thing about being in life. So, covenant begins with a warning: always grow. And covenant begins with a process. Allow and trust flow. Within the flow is knowledge. And where you flow to, the people that you meet, the experiences you have, the jobs that you are offered, the food that is brought to you, the colors that you will experience at any moment in time. These are all part of the amazing phenomenon of life. And the more you become aware and the deeper your experience called God, the more you'll realize that this is an incredibly perfect world. Now, it's imperfect by human standards because we have a body and we have certain other requirements. But its nature is magnificent and perfect. It is unified, it is truth-based, and it is creative in a way that constantly weaves itself into more beautiful and glorious forms and weeds out the negatives automatically. It's a beautiful, beautiful, amazing world. And the more you elevate your awareness and the more you deepen your experience called God, the more you'll see that is the foundation. No matter how much you're suffering right now, no matter how difficult your relationships are, they are still within a fabric of living reality, which is truly, truly magnificent and worthy of life and worthy of your life. So go ahead and join us to uncover, discover, and please, if you've been given bad religion, which was not properly founded on true spirituality, recover your sense of who you are and the gift of the religion that you were born into, or find another one if you don't like the one that you have. Find one that fits who you are right now. This is Michael Shevack. Again, I cannot thank you enough. Please send this out to people, for heaven's sakes. Thank you very much. See you next time on God Search.